pocket pairs have you been dealt, he says, when one of his pocket pairs was a set in a 3-bet pot versus me that I totally paid off?
Apparently, all you have to do is complain. We raised to 225 with pocket sevens, right in the midst of griping to Doug about not being dealt many pocket pairs. He sees this and thinks that it's comical that I may have gotten one. He asked to get a sweat, and I let him see.
There we go. You see, let me get this.
250
I had a lucky sweat by it.
McLovin wants to dance. He calls for 150 on top of his straddle with ace-4. We're heads up in position. The flop comes 8-6-4 rainbow. We've got second pair and a gutter. McLovin checks. He's a really nice guy, 25-year-old organ donor from Hawaii. This is a flop that I consider checking back on because it'll hit the straddler's range hard, even if it doesn't connect strongly with the opponent's actual hand. I anticipate getting check raised somewhat regularly. I make a calculated decision to bet 300 anyway, with intentions of calling a check raise with my pair and gutter. If I do get check raised, I have excellent card removal to some of the strong hands like 7-5 suited that the opponent will be representing. McLovin isn't sure bottom pair is good. He indeed puts in the check raise to 900 to represent mostly a set or 2 pair because that's what he has removal for. I stick with my plan to call for 600 more, not fully convinced that I'm up against anything that strong yet. The turn is another 8. I love seeing this card because it removes set and 2-pair combos that we could have been up against on the flop. A lot of players don't check raise hands like 9-8 or 10-8 on the flop since you don't necessarily have to turn those into bluffs, so I'm not too concerned about being up against just trips, mostly concerned about being up against full houses. McLovin looks a little uncertain regarding what to do. He chooses to continue firing, but he only makes it 1200. Doug knows what I have and is trying his best not to give anything away. I appreciate that. I didn't call 900 on the flop to fold to a $1,200 turn bet when I liked the card that came out. I call, still not knowing exactly where we're at, but sensing that we've got the best hand. The river is another 8. If a second 8 was good, 3 8s on the board is better. We've counterfeited sets of 6s and 4s as well as 6-4. In the off chance that the opponent has 7-5, we beat that now too. I already mentioned that a lot of players wouldn't have check raised with a single 8 on the flop, and there are only 2 combined combos of 8-6 and 8-4 suited, only 1 combo of 8-7 suited, and 1 combo of 8-5 suited. I'm McLovin it as the opponent checks. I really don't think that I'm up against anything that has much value anymore. As long as we're not up against quads, we should have the best hand. There's a small chance that we're up against 9s or 10s. I'm not too worried about that though. I'm almost certain that McLovin was either bluffing earlier or at a strong hand that has been stripped of nearly all value. So how do we make money with this assessment? We bet tiny to get called by a 6 or 4 or to induce a bluff. There's almost no chance that pocket 9s or 10s will reopen the pot with a check raise when I can have hands like aces, kings, queens, and a few quad 8 combos. So if we bet and get raised, we can be fairly certain that we're up against quads or a bluff.
What is Brad going to do here?
Brad's got to put his opponent on a 6 or a 4, I'd imagine here, so he's going to be betting. Small bet, I think. Was that under 1,000 or was 500? So milky.
Milk and cookies.
This is the second instance within the same hand that I bet small with intentions of calling a raise. McLovin had quads earlier against Doug, so he's reached his quads quota for the day. If he has it here and he raises me, good for him. I'm not a believer though, particularly after he checked the river and I bet tiny. It's a situation that's so annoying when you have nothing that you have to fight back every urge not to raise. There's no snap decision. The bet at 10% the size of the pot completely freezes the opponent. He's thinking, will a check raise work, or does he want me to check raise him? Do I ever beat anything? Maybe I should fold. How can a fold be right when I'm getting 11-1 and I have a full house? For almost 2 minutes, we don't hear a word from McLovin. I'm enjoying every second of putting the Irish R&B singer in the cage. To his credit, he's able to properly narrow down what I have. Is he disciplined enough to let it go, though?
Yeah, such a good bet. Pocket sevens.
Oh! He called!
He called his hand. A great call by McLovin. McLovin locked in, knows he's got 7s. It's going to pay him off anyways.
Take him at 500. Go.
Wow,
Sevens.
what a read.
Fuck it. Next time I'll slap raised.
Slap raise.
You might have just heard McLovin say that next time he'll snap raise me on the river, and in this hypothetical world, I said that I would have called. I bet with a plan in a spot where most people check back, we get almost every ounce of value we can out of a flopped bottom pair. Even though it's a smaller pot, correctly calling the check raise and the turn bet with 7s, and then getting our tiny bet called on the river is at least in some ways more fun than the set of 6s hand. Shortly after, we pick up pocket 7s on the button, onto the gun +1, raises to 30. A player in middle position calls, the cutoff calls, I'd like to play, I call, the big blind calls. He was the opponent in the previous hand. We're going 5 ways to the flop. It comes queen 7-5 with 2 clubs. We have middle set and 4 opponents. Unfortunately, it checks to me. No one's seeing any free cards. I bet 120. I chose the larger sizing since there are a couple draws out there, there are several opponents, and I don't have a queen. Someone or multiple people should be able to call a bet for that amount. It's too bad for us, we don't get a call. Something better happens. The big blind puts in a check raise to 300. This is such a good spot to be in because this player didn't 3-bet pre-flop like I imagined he would with pocket queens. His range is capped at a set of 5s or a 2-pair hand at best. It folds back to me. We're playing deep stack poker. I've got a decision to make. Do I flat, hoping that the turn is a blank in order to make my move then? The risk with this option is that the turn could be something like the 8 of clubs, which might either give my opponent the lead, or if he has 2-pair or a set of 5s, it could freeze him and make it so that he's no longer willing to put in as much money. If I raise right now, it could scare him off either a 1-pair hand like king-queen or a semi-bluff. I fight off my urge to pile in money. Instead, I take the patient approach, calling for 180 more. The turn is the jack of hearts. It's great because we still have what's essentially the nuts since the opponent will never have turned a set. I'm expecting to see a big bet from him. Surprisingly, he bets 300 again. I don't know what hand it makes sense for the big blind to bet this amount with. Maybe he just wanted to see where he was at on the flop with a 1-pair hand like king-queen or queen-10, and now that he's gotten called, he doesn't know what to do and is trying to get to showdown cheaply. I'm no longer going to wait around though. The time is now to make a move. I raised to 800. This should look odd since I didn't put in a 3rd bet on the flop. A jack comes out, I faced a small bet, and suddenly I want to raise to play a massive pot. It might look like I'm trying to pull off a bluff with some sort of draw. If he somehow has a better set, that's just unlucky for me. I'm never folding to a shove, even though it'd be for piles. The big blind eventually comes to his decision.
Once, twice. Up to you.
We're in a pot well over $4,000 with a set on a very draw-heavy board, and we're running it twice. If I win this, I'll be up $3,500. If I lose, I'll once again be stuck for the day, and I won't have any energy to keep playing after a long session of battling. I'll have to book a loss. Everything comes down to 2 river cards. The first one is the 4 of spades. At least no club gets there, but 8-6 makes it straight. The second river is the 4 of hearts. Basically, the only hand that I'm worried about being up against is 8-6 of clubs. Guess what we're up against? The opponent has ace-6 of clubs. He bricked the ace-high flush. We win both runouts for the biggest pot that I've won in months. Waiting until the turn to raise pays off huge. Not only do we stack the opponent for a ton of chips, but it's possible that we could have gotten it in against him on the flop, and if we ran it twice at that point, he potentially could have made a straight or a flush on the second runout since we would have seen one more card come out. Sometimes it's tough to battle back from being down 1,500. Not only did we recoup that amount, with this enormous pot coming towards us, we're up 3,500. It's been a $5,000 swing in our direction. This is the most money that I've had in front of me in a 5-10 game at Bellagio ever. I've never had this much big stack energy. Shortly into our time at the new table, Maria Ho is one of my favorite players and personalities in poker, open shoves for 130,000. I've got pocket 7s on the button and about 13 big blinds. I reshove. I'm happy to see the situation that we somehow have Maria dominated. Maria is less happy about it.
There we go.
Oh no!
Oh no, indeed.
I thought we were gonna flip.
That's
a little
I think it looks
unfortunate.
good. I haven't seen it before, but
I
it
got
suits you.
7s against Brad's
I'll take
6s, but I feel a 6 coming.
I certainly don't want to see a 6. The flop comes ace-7-3 with 2 clubs. We drill middle set at a crucial point. We pretty much have this thing locked up. Let's just ship the pot our direction. No need to see a turn in river. Unfortunately, the tournament director doesn't go for that idea. The turn is the 9 of clubs, giving Maria way more hope than I'd like. She can pick up the win if she hits a club that's not an ace.
Spicy turn
Yeah,
card.
I like this. Crush his soul on the river. Make him think he has it locked up on the flop.
Don't do it to me.
Yes.
River card. Maria
Club.
needs a club to
So many
stay
clubs left in the deck.
alive. And it's a 9 of spades.
Unlucky.
Good luck, guys.
That will do it for the StormX ambassador, Maria Ho.
We're in level 22. There are less than 100 players left. I've got some additional people that I want to shut up hard. We pick up pocket 7s in the big blind. James Carroll raises to 125,000 from the cutoff. He's another one of these superstar players that we're going to have to battle with. I defend the big blind for 65,000 more. Nothing has gone our way since the big double up 2 hours ago, so the stack is down to 2,450,000. We're heads up out of position against a WPT main event winner with over $5 million in live earnings. The flop comes 8-7-3 all spades. we've got middle set on a highly coordinated board. I check to James. I know that he knows that this flop will smash my big blind defend range, given that it contains middling and low cards that are all one suit, yet he bets 100,000 anyway. I have an important decision to make. I can put in the check raise now, but I wouldn't be fist pump getting it in if I got jammed on, and I wouldn't want to get called, then have a spade come out, and have to check fold. If the opponent is bluffing with complete air, we don't necessarily want to chase him off either. I call to keep the pot more manageable and conceal our strength. The turn is the 10 of clubs, so some straights get there, and pocket tens now has us beat. I check once more. James comes in with a much larger bet sizing of 525,000. I'm surprised because this is another card that connects with the board that's theoretically good for our big blind defend range, even after calling a flop bet, and James isn't afraid. If we call, we'll have 1.7 million behind. It'll be about a pot-sized bet. This isn't a great situation for the cutoff to bluff, so there's at least a decent chance that we're behind at the moment. I don't want to jam and risk getting snap called by a flush. I flat, hoping to see one of the 10 cards that'll help us improve. The river is the best one of those 10. It's the 7 of hearts, giving us quads and a huge pot. It's hard to contain my excitement as I check. James doesn't look to be concerned about the board pairing. He does an inventory check, cuts out chips, and bets 900,000 that'll eventually be coming to us. We only have 800,000 on top of that. I put in the check raise shove, which would be suicidal if we didn't have at least the ace high flush. James is in shock as he knows he's run into a monster, but it isn't that much more for him to call. He goes deep into the tank. It seems likely that he flopped a flush. After a long deliberation, he makes the fold. This is when we get the chance to pull the camera out. I let James know that he made a great laydown. He confirms that he indeed flopped a flush and then does an amazing job to get away from it on the river. We do well to avoid getting our stack in bad, correctly assess the situation that the opponent likely wasn't bluffing, display some patience, and we get rewarded at the end.
Yeah, all the sevens. Check call flop, check call turn, check jam river.
Things weren't going that well for almost the entire second level. To get this win at a key moment is a giant boost to get some momentum back on our side. A bit later, we're dealt pocket sevens in the hijack. I raised to 60,000. The opponent in the big blind has about 30 BBs. He calls with king 5 offsuit. As your stack gets shorter, the value of having a high card goes up considerably, and you can justify making calls with worse and worse hands like this one containing only one high card. We're heads up in position. The flop comes ace queen 5 all diamonds. I'll have nearly all the possible king high flushes in my range aside from king 3 and king deuce of diamonds, and I'll have other strong hands like smaller flushes, all the sets, ace queen, and ace 5 suiteds. I'm pretty content with the flop, thinking that it's possible that my opponent flopped a flush, but he would have 3-bet or jammed pre-flop with hands like aces, queens, ace queen, and ace king. The opponent checks. Our hand doesn't really have that much value and will only get worse as more diamonds or more high cards come out. It's a flop that's pretty good for our range though. I put out a small bet of 50,000 to see if we can get the opponent to fold a hand with equity, and really just to see how he responds. I anticipate getting check raised by almost all the flushes in the big blind's range except maybe king high flushes. As the opponent is pondering about what to do, I don't get the sense that he's really thinking about raising me. He calls, then he checks his cards for a diamond. The vast majority of the time when people do this, it's because they only have one diamond in their hand at most. Usually if you have suited cards, you're able to remember what suit they are. With this look, I can rule out the opponent having all set and 2-pair combos as well because it wouldn't be possible for him to be holding a diamond. He'd know that. The fact that he didn't check raise, again, basically rules out almost all flush combos. I pretty much put the opponent on an ace or queen with at most one diamond in his hand. It's also possible that we're up against king jack, king 10, or jack 10 with a diamond. The turn is the 10 of clubs. It's another Broadway card. The big blind checks. We'll never have a set of 10s either after calling pre-flop, although he could have combos of king jack, ace 10, and queen 10 that would give him some strong hands. I'll have all those as well, plus a set of 10s sometimes. I keep the pressure on with a bet of 175,000. Now is when I'd expect to see a check raise from king high flushes. Once again, we don't get it. The big blind calls. I'm still putting him on 1-pair combos. It feels like ace x, maybe king queen, queen jack, or jack 10 with a diamond. The river is the 9 of hearts. We've got 5th pair. The big blind checks one last time. I've got one of the worst hands that I'll have. I don't think that I'll be able to win at showdown. The way I've played this so far, I can have flushes, straights, sets, and 2-pair. The way that the opponent has played this, he really won't have flushes, can't really have sets, and won't have top 2-pair. My general sense is that no matter what, the opponent won't be able to call a shove. If he has a hand like king 8 offsuit, we're way ahead, but if the opponent has a hand like ace 6, or even a hand as good as queen 10, I I still don't think that he's going to want to call an overbet jam. I announce that I'm all in.
5 in your hand instead. It's Brad turning the 7s into a bluff and jamming.
Oh. Okay, Bradley.
All right.
I'm doing this purely as a bluff, but if I somehow have the best hand, then that's even better because there's no risk of us losing the pot. Aside from believing that I'm not up against a super strong range of hands, there are a few other ancillary factors that led me to thinking that a bluff at this point would have a higher probability of getting through. First, I've won every hand at Showdown, even showed strong hands when I didn't have to after making aggressive plays, like when I 3-bet my friend with the kings. Also, there was a hand previously when the same opponent ran into quad deuces after 3-betting pre-flop with ace-jack suited. He called a fairly large-sized river bet with ace high and lost a big chunk of his stack. Normally, you might think that you don't want to run a bluff through a guy who just showed that he was willing to call light, but Daniel said after, "Now at least you guys know that you shouldn't try and bluff me." And he did it in a way that seemed like he was slightly embarrassed that he called, and like he didn't want anyone to try and bluff him going forward so that he wouldn't potentially be embarrassed again. When you know what your opponent wants to do or doesn't want you to do, disappoint him. Going back to the 7s hand, I really don't think that he'd want to call light again and be wrong on stream for his tournament life. He probably has friends and family watching, plus his run could be over if he calls with an ace or some other 2-pair type of hand. This shove puts a ton of pressure on him. If he folds, he for sure stays alive, and he'll still have about 25 big blinds, which he can certainly run up. A lot of this is moot because we see that we actually have the best hand, but this is one of the most interesting hands that I play in the whole tournament because I make this shove after considering a multitude of components that all came together. First, there was the live read of seeing Daniel check his cards while making the call on the flop. Also, this is a board with mostly high cards. I didn't get check raised on the flop, so we ruled out a ton of strong hands based on how it was played pre-flop and on the flop. Then there's my image, which is perhaps as solid as it gets. Finally, there's game flow and pressures of being on stream and not wanting to look silly by making an incorrect call twice for lots of chips, and in this instance, for your tournament life. Daniel folds, and I'm disappointed to find out that he had king 5 because I think he'd fold much better hands than that and much better hands than ours. We win a sizable pot either way, and we're not done.